Hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Friday series with CarrTalk. Excited. This is series number 3. And I always love that intro music. Makes me feel like I'm in a European coffee shop, right? Well, I don't know. That's how I feel.
Yeah, fantastic. On a gloomy day like this in Nebraska, it's nice. I would like to be there.
Yeah, agreed. Right. Well, we can enjoy our chat and coffees and act like we are. Um, very excited to have Will Wong with me today. He's our senior director of pricing at Spreetail. Been with Spreetail several years, and leads all of our pricing and promotions team, and has just a very rich history in merchandising. But yeah, welcome, Will. I'll let you introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Owen. Yeah, so my name is Will Wong. I've been with Spreetail for about just over 3 years now. But yeah, as Owen had mentioned, I spent a lot of time in retail. I spent the last decade up in the Great White North, actually in Canada, where I worked for retailers such as Canadian Tire and Target on a variety of roles, from strategy to merchandising, and then more recently into the e-com world. So really grateful to be here today.
Fantastic. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. I do want to encourage everyone, if you have questions, drop those into the chat or commentary. We will answer those as we go through. All right. Well, there's a lot of change happening right now in e-commerce, given in large part around the global tariff environment and just things that are happening there in trade. And so, let's just start by, I don't know, what data are you seeing, Will, that brands should be monitoring to kind of think about when they should adjust price, change price, think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Owen. I think there are several key data points I really would recommend our audience kind of think through and balance out a mix of competitive data and obviously the financial goals that they have for their particular brand. What I will caveat is a lot of the data that I'll call up and kind of mention is really Amazon centric, which for Spreetail is our largest channel, but also a great bellwether, given that 40% of e-commerce really flows through Amazon. So the very first data point I would call out is really around a macro view. For us at Spreetail, we've developed what's called an Amazon Consumer Price Index, where we try to take the 1,000 top items by category and really try to examine how they've changed in price over the last year over year, kind of really understand at a categorical level, what is the market doing? And we find that the top 1,000 items at a category is a good representation of that. The second item data point I would call out is really what we call digital shelf. And this is meant to be a compilation of items that our brands and our merchants have really dictated as being the most competitive SKUs to their offering and their portfolio. Today, this represents about $3 billion in GMV and gross value on Amazon that we're tracking against. And we'll use tools like Keepa to be able to infer this information, and then we do some adjustments to it internally to be able to get at that data. But it is really interesting in that over the last month, since the announcements of the tariffs, we have seen a bit of a trend towards increasing prices. So you can see that as of March 30th, we saw that our digital shelf was around minus 6.8% year over year. Now it's gone up to sort of minus 4.8% or thereabout. So it is a trending to the right, which is telling us prices increase. But the absolute value of our prices, average sale price overall, is still negative. So we're still actually seeing a lot of prices be lower than they were year over year. So that's just really an interesting data point that we're kind of coming to terms with internally, but is certainly something that we're seeing some movement around, but no drastic changes on the marketplace as of yet in the competitive set that we're examining.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think a lot of us, as we think about the more broad consumer base or U.S. environment, we do see inflation continuing. Of course, it's slowed down from post-pandemic. But, for Spreetail, we sell in durable goods, hard goods. So think of items for your home or backyard or your house or sports and outdoors. And in these goods, on the $3 billion, they are increasing in price right now over the last several weeks, couple of months, but they're still lower on the whole than where they were last year. One reminds me, one thing is that we talked to over 250 different partners and factories from all over, including all of the leading retail partners in the U.S. And we're seeing that though there hasn't been huge uptick so far, a few hundred bips of price, we have May 15th really circled on our calendar date is when we expect dramatic increases to happen. Simply because that's when a lot of brands start to, use up the days of stock they had pre-tariff, because of course all retailers carry, 30 to 60 to 90 days of stock, depending on the SKU. Once that's sold out, then you're forced to raise. And again, there's no retailer in the U.S. that has enough margin to absorb the kind of tariffs that are in place today. And so everyone's going to have to raise on those particular SKUs if they continue to flow those. But yeah, it's helpful to see the data in this way. Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Appreciate the commentary. And then the last data point I'll call up is really around elasticity, right? Knowing what the market will bear for the product that you're carrying is super important. And for us, if we look at average elasticity for retail, what that data tells us is that if we increase our price by 10%, we can expect a demand reduction by 40%. Now that's a very drastic number. That's sort of the number in a vacuum. It's very theoretical and such. And so it is a data point that we're managing towards. And one area that we're trying to refine more granular now, given this tariff environment, is understanding the mix of products by sort of country of origin. So if a particular category is highly penetrated in China and there's a ton of production for that product in China, if you take, for example, small appliances as an example, I think 97% of small appliances are produced there, we would actually mute the impact of demand, because our belief is that everyone's going to have to move their pricing up. There's really no way for the market to really absorb, 145% tariff. So either, brands are going to have to raise their price to kind of slow the demand out, or they're going to, have to take on new product at a much higher price point. So we are taking a closer examination on products and categories that would have a high penetration in China, and we would make adjustments in that basis. But certainly understanding elasticity and sort of what a brand can bear in the market that they play in is really important. And I think that balances out between sort of a macro view down to a competitive view, down to, hey, the financial view of your particular brand. How can it kind of bear it in the market that we're seeing today?
Yeah, it is really sobering to consider that 10% price increase is a 40% drop in demand when we're looking at 145% tariffs. And it's a good reminder probably for all of us. I think a lot of times we go back to, hey, I'm going to manage the business based upon what I've seen in recency, or how, what the cycles of economics have been before. But I think we all need to be very wise to remind ourselves that we've actually, at least not in the last over 50 years, seen tariffs even remotely close to what we're looking at today. And so I think there's a notion of, ensuring we all keep our heads on a swivel, because things are going to change probably real quick and respond in ways that we didn't anticipate. Overall, a couple points that I often hear folks misrealize is that 145% tariff increase doesn't equal 145% price increase, because remember, retailers have many different costs, and the product cost is just one of those. They also have overhead, facilities, transportation, etc. And so if you increase the one by the cost that is their product cost by 145%, that doesn't mean their transportation cost, their brick and mortar retail cost, their marketing cost all go up. So they will increase a portion up to that 145, maybe 50%, 60%, 70%, 80% of that 145, but not the full thing. But yeah, it is sobering to realize how much price increases are going to go, and I think makes sense that it was maybe in a case where all products come out of China, we would mute that kind of elasticity, but it's also a little bit of uncertainty, it seems like, as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing I've been thinking about is how do consumers figure out and how do brands figure out like where the products come from. And so we actually came up with a way at Retail to use AI to find country of origin. And so just a little bit of an insider tip for those of you kind of working through that journey. It's a fantastic thing where Gemini or ChatGPT or others can actually help you find the country of origin for a given UPC or SKU. And historically, you'd have to do all the searching to find that, and now the tool can help with that. As we think about these huge tariffs and price changes, I don't know, Will, how are you kind of thinking about some of the risk of overcorrecting or undercorrecting, or kind of getting that right in terms of the business impact and otherwise?
Yeah. Also a great question, right? I think you often say this, Owen, retail is detail, right? And this balancing act that we have right now feels very supercharged at this time, right? Given all the tariff environment that we're undergoing. So certainly from an overcorrection perspective, you can really reduce the demand on your items, which cue in the demand elasticity that we just kind of talked about. And I think that has real implications on the Amazon marketplace specifically, right? Because if you raise price too drastically, Amazon will suppress that particular listing and call out a high price violation. And frankly, that really impacts your bestseller rank, which we know our brands, ourselves at retail, we fight really hard to try to maintain. That kind of kicks in the flywheel effect that you see on Amazon. So, not ideal. But on the flip side, if you really undercorrect on pricing and underreact, it could all just mean you sell through your goods. You sell through your goods with no a feasible means of actually getting any replenishment, especially with the ship times and delays at ports that are undergoing right now with everything happening. And then you basically don't, get to satisfy the consumer demand. So really, frankly, both are not ideal. It's trying to walk that fine line, and it's whether it's fine or blurry, it's a very tough one. I have to say that to answer this question, I think it really depends, right? The right strategy will really be dependent on availability of inventory, what your competitive set is doing, and how you really anticipate customers reacting to the price, right? It comes back to those 3 points that we kind of talked about earlier. For us at retail, I know that we're working very closely, and Owen, your team is working super closely with our brand partners to really match supply with price, and make sure that we're keeping product moving, right, overall. And in some instances, if the market can bear it, we are having to increase prices, right? That's just the reality of it. And what we'll do is we'll make those adjustments, but I think the key is that what we do afterwards is just really monitoring. And I know that we're doing a lot of monitoring around, when we expect to stock out of those goods at a daily level, at a weekly level, to really manage through whether or not we have enough supply to last us through the season and or the end of year, at least extend us to the point where we believe or hypothesize there's actually a potential stability point to a lot of the conversations around tariffs. It's trying to buy us time for that.
Yeah.
And it's much better to be, in those instances, if where the market can bear, have the price high enough that we can always adjust back down and
Right.
kind of course correct when supply comes back in.
Right. Yeah, I think one thing we've seen a lot and heard a lot is that other retailers, other partners are just kind of saying, hey, with all this noise, I'm just going to do nothing. I'm going to kind of freeze. The problem with that is factories and jobs need to keep, banking money and making revenue and cash. So we can't just freeze. And two, if we freeze, if we don't do any orders, if we don't work on solutions, we don't learn anything. And in a normal environment, if everything was operating tomorrow the same it operated as yesterday, maybe it's fine not to learn a lot. But in the current environment, you have to learn even faster and more repetitiously, because everything's changing and how everything's working together is changing. And so I think those that are constantly taking in data, absorbing, testing, learning the fastest and have the best feedback loops to their organizations will do the best. And so that's where retail, we've not code orders. We've, since the reciprocal have gone in, we've flowed hundreds of containers. We're working with our partners to keep flowing. If there's inventory that's stuck, we are working on it. We're exploring solutions in every creative way to continue to think about how we can propel goods at a healthy, sustainable price, given the current dynamics to the end customer. So that's helpful. One thing that we see is we work on so many different channels, right? Amazon, of course, is a big channel of ours, but also Walmart, Target, Kohl's, Lowe's, Home Depot, eBay, and many, many others. And, as brands are thinking about maybe their own D2C site, or maybe brick and mortar, or maybe other channels, Amazon, Walmart, Target, of course, are big ones. What are some quick insights or advice that you might have, Will, across each platform as you think about pricing?
Yeah, that's a great question. For us, our mandate at retail is really to propel our brands and see success for them. And we find the best way to do that, frankly, is just price parity across the marketplaces. Whether you're a customer of Amazon or you're loyal to Walmart or Target, we try to maintain price parity. Now, there are some marketplaces, obviously, if their fees are a little bit higher, we have to find a way to compensate for that. So we'll adjust the pricing there. Typically, these are on some of the smaller marketplaces. But for the most part, we try to maintain price parity because that's the best representation of our brand. We want to go out there and ensure that the brand has a consistent feel to the consumer overall. That's not to say we won't run promotions, specific to a marketplace, but on the whole, on average, we try to aim for price parity across the board.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, right? We don't want, the Target customer to feel differently than the Amazon customer, than the Walmart customer based upon price. We want them to feel really confident in the brand and what they're buying and feel confident in that. How are you thinking about value or value perception in an environment here where, there may not be as many discounts or promotions or price cuts, right? Retailers may be more cautious because of the tariffs. And so you can't have standard things like Memorial Day sales or Prime Day sales, maybe not as much. Yeah. How are you kind of thinking about that in this current environment?
Yeah, great question. Promos and promotions overall still are a very important element to the go-to-market strategy for us. What I will say is we're being much more selective, right? We want to make sure our brands show up at the right time. So tier one events, you think of Prime Day and Turkey 5, Turkey 12 down the year, certainly want to still participate those. That's a very important communication mechanism to the value of the brand. But we may start to think about the discount depths that might happen on those particular timeframes. So we're working very closely with our channel partners to understand what placement requirements might exist for those particular events. But certainly we are definitely very focused around and being very choiceful and deliberate around which particular events we'll partake in. So really focus around tier one events. One tactic I will share with the audience that I think is a really important one that could be beneficial in terms of communicating value is around the strike-through pricing on Amazon. So if you take a look at this particular product here, you'll notice that there's a list price that I think is $800 or so, but you'll see that our price showing up is $479.99. Well, Amazon has a way of kind of scraping for what's essentially called list price, but essentially is a manufacturer's suggested retail price. Now, they don't always display it, so you'll have to work around trying to find ways in which they will do so. And what we found is that if you can have that price syndicated to another platform, whether it be your direct-to-consumer website that is representative of the brand, they will scrape that and say, hey, this is the manufacturer's suggested retail price. So you can actually show a bit of a savings to the consumer. So that's one tactic we've been trying to take with our brands to say, hey, if you have an MSRP and it's make sure that you have it on your suggested retail price on your website, such that we can start to see if Amazon will qualify that as a strike-through price, and which in this example still doesn't force us to have an actual promotion and price cut, but certainly communicates value and helps with conversion at the checkout.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, right, like every item, every durable good has like a standard MSRP, right? And then has, periods of everyday low price or more aggressive price. And it's important that I think we all appreciate, the value of the goods and understand that as we're kind of making decisions and helping our customers and consumers to make decisions. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's kind of essentially the end of some of the topics we had. Will, thank you so much for your time. I think it's certainly a time where we need to lean into pricing and lean into being more thoughtful and learning and studying more. And so that's probably the one thing that I would advise all of us and everyone listening is now is a time to study, to learn more, to improve your knowledge in this area and ensure you're enabling yourself and your team to study, to learn, to gain new insights, to run more tests. And that's what we're doing at Retail. And we're seeing lots of great insights and learnings. And then also, keep in mind that yes, there's inflation and tariffs on import goods and especially on China goods, but there's a lot of great goods made in the US, right? And those goods have a chance to maybe get more competitive, to win some market share, right? Maybe they'll find some efficiencies or lean out margin or other changes that can help drive more market share. And so I think now there's a chance to keep in mind where products are coming from, how they reach you as a consumer, how they reach a brand. And, of course, as brands, we continue to work harder to find country of origin improvements towards U.S. production. And we're seeing that with Retail. And I think that that's exciting because that enables us to keep a more competitive price that's not going to be burdened by a tariff environment overall. So any closing thoughts or final words of thoughts you might have for our listeners today, Will?
Yeah, I think you've brought up a lot of great points, Owen, and I think the key right now is it is a fluid environment, and you need to react in a fluid manner as well, right? To being flexible, and that's certainly something and an adage that we're taking at Retail to constantly just monitor the situation and make adjustments. Literally, we are looking at this daily at this point, and I would encourage our audience to also do so because things could change the next day, right? So that's if there's anything that we've learned in the last month is that there's a lot of changes that can happen very quickly. So we're trying to react the same way.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Will, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. We'll see you on the next Car Talk series. Bye-bye now.
Thank you all.